StormForge forges JVMs. Cisco switches get the boot. VMware plies partners once again. Google makes quantum last. Open source bugged by AI. And the US fires up the Jaegers to take on Salt Typhoon in this episode of the Gestalt IT Rundown. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Gestalt IT Rundown. Today is Wednesday, December the 11th, and I hope that you're all ready to go on a run because it is National Stretching Day. And if you're not stretching before you go on a run, you could get a cramp. But fortunately, we're here to give you all of the news.
Excuse me, sorry, I had to stretch a little bit, Tom.
Well, as you can see, my wonderful co-host, who I am joining in person this week, is definitely taking up all of the available space here at the Rundown News Desk. Stephen, are you ready to go on a run now?
I'm actually not, because I just knocked my microphone off. Am I ready to do this?
Well,
Should I do this?
thankfully, there is an app for getting your microphone back on your body because it is National App Day. And as you can see, we're here together to record our yearly in-person rundown together because, you know, what would a staff meeting be without taking an opportunity to run down the news that's been happening? Stephen, how are things in your life other than microphones?
Well, apart from the fact that I have to sit next to you again, Tom, things are going okay. It's been a busy time for us. We've been doing a lot of field day events this year. We got a lot more planned next year. And of course, I've actually been hitting the gym, doing some stretching, using some apps. I don't know, I'm stretching the metaphor, I think.
Well, good news is that we don't need to stretch anymore because we have a wonderful lineup of news that you are going to want to take advantage of and learn a little bit before we get to the end of the year. So we're going to go ahead and jump right in with a big announcement from StormForge because they've introduced a new feature for optimizing Java virtual machine workloads on Kubernetes. They're focusing on right-sizing these workloads by leveraging JVM-specific metrics. Traditional tools only consider container level memory usage, but StormForge's solution uses machine learning to do a detailed analysis of Java metrics, including heap size requirements and other things. This provides precise recommendations for heap sizing and manual and automated implementation of these recommendations, which aims to enhance resource efficiency, reduce costs, and optimize performance. Currently, this feature is available in limited release. If you would like to take advantage of that, you should definitely head over to the StormForge site and sign up. Stephen, why would people be concerned about JVMs?
Well, I was as surprised as anyone to learn that the prevalence of Java in the enterprise still, and in fact, I guess it's not super surprising that people are using Java because, of course, it was a very popular language for a long time. Many of the folks that I know that work in enterprise IT shops are actually doing a lot of Java development. But you know, I didn't really guess that a lot of that stuff would be ported over to modern application platforms like Kubernetes. In fact, that's what's happened. According to some studies, 60 to 70% of all applications running in Kubernetes are actually Java JVM workloads. And so it makes a lot of sense that StormForge would be right there to deliver on this in terms of their overall optimization strategy. We've heard from StormForge a few times at Tech Field Day. If you go back and look for their Cloud Field Day presentations from a couple of years ago, you can learn a little bit more about how the overall platform works to optimize resources. The fact that they're now also including really deep insights into Java and the requirements of Java applications makes a lot of sense to me, given the fact that Java is so prevalent. So again, I love stories like this because it shows a company that is deeply understanding of the market and the customer needs and isn't just building something because it's cool. They're building something because customers need it and customers are going to benefit from it. Cisco's NXOS has a new bug that everyone should be aware of. The vulnerability could allow an attacker with physical access to the switch to bypass image signature verification for the operating system. The exploit does require physical access, as I mentioned, to bypass the bootloader in order to get into the switch BIOS before the OS loads. Security patches have been released and upgrading is necessary to prevent this bug because there is no workaround. Now, we've always said that physical access to a machine gets past many security protections, but of course, bootloader protection is one of those things where companies have been trying to keep machines secure. Tom, what do we make of this story?
I think this is a big deal because Cisco has effectively admitted that there is a bug in their switch BIOS, and not the desktop like campus switches. These are NXOS. These things run like data centers. They're saying that there's a bug in the BIOS that can be bypassed if you have physical access. I'm sure it's probably something like popping in a USB key and being able to basically trick the system into booting off of the USB key with an unsigned image. That's a failure with BIOS. But more importantly, do you remember a few months ago we talked about vulnerabilities in secure boot images? Well, boy, those chickens are coming home to roost now, aren't they? And this is one of the problems that we're seeing across the industry is that the standardization of using certain tools is great because it means that once we've solved that problem, like secure boot, we can say with certainty, the switch can boot and it will only boot signed images, and you don't have to worry about bad firmware or introducing bugs or spyware, things like that. The problem is that once that genie is out of the bottle, for lack of a better euphemism, you have to deal with what happens there. And one of the issues that Cisco's running into is these are patchable things that you have to take the switch down to fix. You can't just like do a workaround for your next maintenance window. You've got to take it down, you've got to issue the service patch, unless you're running on a Nexus 92160YC-X, which is my favorite winning word in Scrabble. But that particular switch will never be patched because it's out of support. And this comes back to something that Microsoft and a lot of other companies have been dealing with for years. Are you liable to patch these things that are out of service but not out of production? Or is your response to everybody, well, I guess better go buy a new one? I don't have a good answer, but I think that what we're going to see is that these kinds of issues are indeed going to lead to other problems down the road because, as Stephen mentioned in the intro, we've said for years that if you have physical access to a device, then it's not your device anymore. It belongs to whoever has physical access to it. But we do need to have physical access to these devices to be able to install things and patch cables into them and what forth. We've got to make sure that we're securing them in other ways. And Cisco needs to come up with a way to say maybe disable console access or USB access, because if they don't, this problem's only going to get worse before it gets better. VMware by Broadcom has reversed course on a decision to cut out major partners for their major accounts. This news comes as Broadcom announced that instead of taking its largest 2,000 customers private in a sales capacity, they're instead only going to take their 500 biggest buyers private and open the remaining 1,500 customers to partner deals. The move is seen as a way to stem the flow of companies that are slowly moving away from VMware solutions when license renewals come up by having local resources and trusted partners that can leverage relationships. While none of the largest VARs in the US have released any statements about this switch, the community is generally skeptical of the announcement and worried what might happen if Broadcom decides to change their mind again once those renewal deals get signed. Stephen, how do you see this happening with VMware? Is this a move to bring partners back into the ecosystem, or is this a last-ditch effort to get some of those renewals?
Well, I think they're trying to get those renewals. So far, what we're hearing from our friends in the industry, both on the end user side as well as on the software vendor side that have ways of seeing things like this, is that there hasn't actually been a mass migration away from VMware. In fact, the number of migrations has been modest enough that when a major account does decide to switch from VMware to something else, it becomes a news-making story, like we've talked about here on the rundown. That being said, there's definitely a lot of disgruntled customers. There's a lot of anger. There's also a lot of disgruntlement among VARs and other VMware partners over the way that VMware has been treating them and the way that VMware has been approaching this. And we do know that some customers have told us that they are holding off and signing, maybe holding off entirely on signing a renewal yet until they decide what they're going to do, or maybe they're going to renew for a shorter term or a smaller number of seats or something. They're trying to figure out ways to reduce the inevitable increase that, based on the announcements that Broadcom and VMware made earlier this year. So maybe what we're seeing here is a sign that VMware internally is a little worried about those renewals. I suspect that that's what's going on. So as we discussed on the rundown earlier this year, Broadcom, VMware decided that they were going to focus on the 2,000 biggest customers, that those would go direct, that would be a way for Broadcom, VMware to directly service those companies, to really focus on selling into those accounts. Now what we're hearing is that they're really going to focus only on the top 500. The rest of them can go to resellers. But the question remains, why are they doing this? Are they doing this because customers aren't signing up? Are they doing this because customers really want to work with value-added resellers that actually provide them additional services? Are they doing this because they just don't have the internal resources to service 5,000 big accounts? We're really not sure what's going on. One thing we can be sure of, though, is that the catastrophe, the migration away from VMware, has not happened, and that VMware and Broadcom are softening their approach to some aspects of this, including, by the way, things like rebates and so on. They're softening their approach to a lot of the various tools that they've had in the sales process. And we may see a softer Broadcom VMware in the future. Google released a paper this week showing just how far quantum computing has come in the past few years. The company was able to increase the number of hardware quantum bits, or qubits, dedicated to error correction in order to create a 105 qubit cluster that was stable for over an hour. This is impressive because most qubits only have a lifespan of under a second. For more on what this means for the future of quantum computing, let's turn it over to our friend, Dr. Bob Suter, an expert on quantum computing here at the Futurum Group.
Well, I'm joining you this morning from sunny Santa Clara, California. I mention that because this is the site of the Q2B conference in Silicon Valley. It's held every year. This is the 7th event, and it's really the last quantum computing conference of the year. So it's no surprise that there are announcements this week. And Google announced a bit of a doozy on Monday, right before the conference began. And there are different elements to it. A lot of it's really very good, but let me start with the part that's frankly a little bit silly. Way back in 2019, Google published a result claiming so-called quantum supremacy, where they could do something on a quantum computer that would take a classical computer. So think of the supercomputers in the cloud, government labs and so forth. It would take them 10,000 years to do this computation on that. Well, I was with IBM at the time. And in fact, my group very quickly published a result and said, look, it's not going to take 10,000 years. It's only going to take 3 days. All right. Well, 3 days still sounds great. But since then, other people have come up with results that are very, very close and only slightly longer than the original Google result, which took well less than a second. The problem is that the problem that they worked on is totally useless. It's just what's called a random sampling. It has to do with probability, statistics, and so forth. And it is never, ever a problem that you would do for any useful reason whatsoever. And nor does it lead to anything useful. It's just a benchmark. All right, well, they did this quantum supremacy, maybe not quite so supreme. The world goes on. Last year, they published a similar result where it would take 47 years to actually do yet another useless computation. So for about 5 minutes, people applauded this and said, wait a minute, this is still has no value, right? Okay. Monday comes along and they announce, well, it's not, just 47 years. We can do this problem, again, this useless problem, nearly instantly compared to a septillion years, which is one with a ridiculous number of zeros. And people say, wow, they can do this really fast thing that would take it. But the problem is useless. And so I term this quantum supremacy version 3, and I hope it's the last we hear of these. Now, the really good part, and by the way, Google researchers and engineers in quantum are extraordinary. They're the top of the world with the other big labs like IBM Research and so forth. They showed a very important result related to error correction with quantum computers. Remember, a quantum computer, well, it kind of works the way nature does, but it deals with very small things, electrons, photons, things like this. Um, and so when we try to build these computers, nature interferes with the computation. You would expect it to be perfect, but it's not for different reasons. And so these little errors that creep in have to be fixed. And what Google showed was that they now have a way of fixing these errors without having more errors be introduced into this. Because you can imagine the problem. If you start making these systems bigger and you have more and more and more errors every time you make the system bigger, you're not really helping things at all. So this is the key result. And this is the important scientific result, not the septillion business. Now, is Google going to break blockchain with this? No. Can we solve new problems in chemistry or AI or anything with this? No. So the world has not changed today regarding practical applications of this. It's just paving the way toward future work with bigger systems. Now, one little footnote. This paper that Google talked about, this research paper, was in fact published in August. It was only put up Monday in a more prestigious journal, Nature. So researchers have known about this result for a little while. The Willow chip that they've introduced is interesting, but again, the world has not changed today from a few days ago with respect to this. But the future is looking a little brighter, that we can do some of the things with quantum computers that we've always hoped to be able to do. So back to you.
Thanks a lot for that coverage, Bob. It's always great to have you join us on the Rundown.
The use of LLMs in Gen AI and security is on the rise. However, one area that is seeing some pushback is in bug reporting. Security developers from the Python Software Foundation as well as the curl project have noted a significant increase in the amount of reports that have been generated by AI tools. These reports look valid on the surface and take some time to process, usually leading to no action being taken because they're hallucinations. The curl maintainer specifically has said that he's frustrated that people are using AI to send in bogus reports and then clogging the system to the point where the volunteer members are overwhelmed and maybe seeking to stop helping the project because of the amount of crap that they have to wade through in order to do the right thing. Stephen, are we seeing AI causing more problems than it's solving here?
Yeah. Here's the thing. These are some very high-profile open source projects. You may not be familiar with curl, but curl is incredibly widespread as an open source tool in all sorts of web application development. Basically, most modern applications have curl somewhere in the stack. And then we've also got Python. A lot of different Python libraries are used basically everywhere in the modern application stack, in the AI stack. These are incredibly important tools. And they're being flooded with AI-generated bug reports. As you said, the example in the blog post that we are linking to here talks about, for example, a bug report that says that they're using SSLv2, even though they explicitly don't use SSLv2, because essentially the LLM is, somebody's using the LLM, they're scanning the code, they're probably generating the bug report with the LLM, they may even be automating the submission of the bug report in some way, and essentially the LLM has no actual understanding of what's happening. We've seen exactly the same thing happen in other areas. I know that lots of community-driven internet areas are being flooded with what's called slop, which is basically AI-generated nonsense that sounds legit until you really look at it. I've personally seen this in many areas of interest for me. Now, AI slop is a problem because it wastes valuable time for maintainers and editors and approvers, but it actually could be much more nefarious, and that's hinted at here a little bit. As we heard, the University of Minnesota got in trouble for running sort of a test against open source projects last year to see how vulnerable they were to bad submissions. Now, they got their hands slapped pretty hard for that, but the proof is that there are actually a lot of people out there trying to get bad code in. So it is entirely possible that these tools could be used currently or in the future as a way, as a vehicle to get not just AI slop in there, and maybe by well-meaning people, but actually nefarious code in there as well. So you could imagine a situation where a threat actor uses AI to regularly generate code, valid or seemingly valid code, changes, updates, that sort of thing, to interact in forums, to basically get to be part of the community, and then later on adds code vulnerabilities and things like that to the project once they become more trusted. You could also see this as a way to game various other things. For example, there's still a thriving community of people that are trying, for example, to influence what Wikipedia says about their clients. That's against the rules, but people constantly are doing it. The editors there are constantly trying to shut it down, and there are a lot of AI slop reports going into Wikipedia these days as a way to try to build trust in order to exploit that whole process. The same thing could happen basically in any area where you've got people that are submitting user-generated code, whether it's in a forum or a Discord or whatever, user-generated content, and then building up a reputation in order to exploit it in the future. And that was my reaction when I read this blog by the Python maintainer here, who said that this was a big problem for him. My first thought was, this is someone who's trying to get exploits into Python. And if you got exploits into Python, boy, that would open up pretty much every project, every application out there. So I'm sure they're on the lookout for it. They really need to figure out ways of combating this, because at the most benign level, AI slop is a waste of time. And unfortunately, it could be much, much worse.
All right, we had a story we wanted to take a closer look at because, let's be fair, it's the holiday season, and I think this one's going to be the gift that keeps on giving. The big story this week was the continued fallout from our friends at Salt Typhoon. You may recall that we covered this 2 months ago on the rundown. Well, now the US government is really starting to feel the heat from the exposure of so many telecom companies, and they're wanting some answers. We're going to start off with our friend, FCC Chairwoman Jessica Rosenworcel, because she's announced a proposed set of rules that would require companies that participate in the Communications Assistance for Law Enforcement Act, also known as CALEA, they would have to have a yearly requirement to certify their cybersecurity risk management plans in order to prevent hackers. But that's not good enough for Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon, because he has proposed a bill that would require telecom networks to be secured, with the FCC going further and implementing specific requirements instead of just saying that they need to certify their own plans. I know that this has been a big story in the news for the last 2 months, and there's been some shocking things that have been said by the US federal government that go against the grain of everything they've been trying to tell us for years. But Stephen, I want to jump in here. Why is the US federal government suddenly reversing course and saying we've got to get this thing under control?
Well, because they've got to get this thing under control. I was actually having a conversation this week with a non-technical person, and the conversation came around to basically foreign governments hacking and law enforcement and things like that. But it was with a non-technical person, and I was so proud as a dedicated nerd and reporter for the Gestalt IT Rundown when this person pointed out to me that, it sounds like a good idea to have law enforcement have access to systems, but as soon as you do that, it just opens it up for the bad guys to exploit those backdoors themselves and get into those systems. And I was just like, yes, thank you. Why can't the entire government understand what you're saying? It's true. Anytime you have a backdoor into a system, it's going to be exploited by the bad guys. This has happened literally every backdoor since the beginning of computing. And it's been warned about literally since I was in college. I remember reading about this on the well and in publications at the time saying, no, we cannot have exploitable backdoors. It sounds like a good idea to let law enforcement snoop on telecoms channels. It sounds like it would be secure if we built a system where they would have to apply and show a warrant and then open up the back doors. what's going to happen? Inevitably, the bad guys are going to use that same system to get to get in because it's just a honeypot. It's like, it would sound like a good idea if you required everyone to keep all of their cash money in a big pile at City Hall so that the police could protect it. Well, yeah, except then you've created the biggest, baddest honeypot anywhere, and so everyone's going to attack that, and they're going to find ways to exploit it. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. We saw CALEA, which, again, it sounded like a bad idea when it was originally proposed under the Clinton administration, which I remember because I was in tech at that time too. And yes, surprise, surprise, it is a bad idea. And now what we're trying to do is we've got proposals to fix the barn door now that the horses have already escaped. We need to shut this stuff down, and we need to stop proposing backdoors for the good guys.
I'm going to butcher a quote from Fight Club that's absolutely appropriate here. On a long enough timeline, the likelihood that you're going to get hacked is 100%. And CALEA has been around, like you said, since the Clinton administration. So this is 20 years old at this point. And we knew that something was going to happen. What we hoped was that, ultimately the bad guys aren't going to have enough resources to be able to get into some of these areas, and we're going to keep them air gapped and secured. And no, I was kidding. You've seen the security in an average telecom. We're lucky the thing didn't catch on fire 10 years ago. And for the federal government agencies like the FBI to make a statement last week saying, you guys should really be using iMessage and Signal because they're secure and nobody can eavesdrop on them, my jaw literally hit the table. Because this is the same organization, as Stephen pointed out, for years that has been saying, well, we need backdoor access into iMessage because we can't do our jobs. Do you see now why we told you that this is a bad idea? Because any backdoor that exists is by its very nature exploitable. Ask anyone who saw all of those hacking tools get dumped onto the internet 10 years ago when the CIA got breached, and how many hack platforms, how many malware delivery devices have been built on top of the stuff that we've been doing. Like, if it exists, it will be leaked. If it gets leaked, it will be used. And I think, well, first of all, I can never say this enough, but props to Ron Wyden for holding people's feet to the fire and saying outright, you have to do better. You have to be better than this. If I could have a Senate full of Ron Wydens who understands technology as well as he does, our technology landscape would be a much better place. And I know that there's some shifts that are about to happen in the US federal government, especially on the FCC. And having had Jessica Rosenworcel kind of leading the charge on these people for the last couple of years has been kind of nice because she's saying similar things to what we believe in the tech industry. There needs to be better oversight. There needs to be certification. You can't just plug everything into a dark room with a keep out sign on the door and hope that everything is going to work out for the best. Because even during things like the Arab Spring revolts of years ago, we saw massive internet taps being installed in data centers that were just, brushed by on the news. And we're like, wait a minute, I recognize that device. I know what they've been doing with the internet traffic. That's something that the US government has wanted for years. They've wanted to be able to funnel all that traffic through a place where they can monitor it and keep an eye out for ne'er-do-wells. And now look where it's got you. The ne'er-do-wells actually turned out to be other governments who love the fact that you've centralized everything, and it's a one-stop shop to be able to get in there. And this is the other thing that people need to understand when they read this story. This is not, oopsie daisy, we got hacked. We need to change some passwords and everything will be fine. They are literally discussing whether or not they need to send funding to AT&T and Verizon to rip out all of the gear that's already in their networks, because there's a very good possibility they're never going to be able to eject Salt Typhoon at all. They are that embedded in there. So I feel like Jessica Rosenworcel's not going far enough, but she's also kind of hamstrung because of some of the rules that the Supreme Court has laid down about whether or not the FCC has enforcement powers. I think Ron Wyden's on the right track, but the question is he going to be able to get the bill passed in time to be able to get them the resources that they need, or at least the requirements that they have to fix this before Salt Typhoon eavesdrops on anything else? I mean, I'm not worried because I use iMessage to text all of my friends anyway, but I'm worried about my grandma.
And on that note, too, let me get back to the whole iMessage encryption thing. Yeah, it was really jaw-dropping to have the FBI recommending that people use encrypted communication channels and Signal and so on, because this is what we nerds have been saying for a long, long time. It is a good idea. However, of course, we know that there are some nuances there. Apple has been doing a very good job at doing end-to-end encryption on iMessage. Google's end-to-end encryption, one of the bloggers in the Apple community gleefully pointed out that Google's description of their own encryption is incomplete at best and misleading at worst, because not all of the Google stuff is end-to-end encrypted unless everybody's running the latest versions. But that being said, RCS is now being deployed across iPhones and Google Android phones, and that can be encrypted. We heard about Signal, of course. I like the fact that these problems are causing normal people to finally wake up and realize what's going on. Another story that we had recently that kind of is relevant here, Apple implemented a new feature that reboots an iPhone if it hasn't been used in 72 hours. That was something that law enforcement was crying quite a lot about, because they would have these iPhones in lockup. In many cases, they would actually have them be unlocked by the suspect, and then they would plug them in and they would keep them in a special situation, disconnected, so that they could access that data later. I understand why law enforcement wants that, and in fact, I can understand why that would be beneficial to them in some cases. The problem is that if you allow that, if you allow a lower level of protection after first unlock, AFU as Apple calls it, then you're also theoretically opening the door to people exploiting that on stolen phones, to criminals using it to exploit people's vulnerability, to break into people's identity theft, sharing photos, all sorts of things that you can do if you grab somebody's phone. One of the things that struck me in New York City this weekend was how many people walk around on the streets with a $1,000 device out and in their hands and pay no attention, pay no mind to anyone. And again, non-technical person said, well, of course, that thing's not useful if somebody steals it, because it's going to be locked and it's going to be encrypted, and they won't be able to register it and all that. And I wanted to actually them, but again, I wanted to also give them a pat on the back and a hug, because they're seeing the value of encryption right there. A normal, ordinary, non-technical person is seeing that having these devices be locked down, having them be encrypted, having them reboot into BFU mode after 72 hours, all of these things protects all of us in a way that allowing law enforcement to snoop on phones might not protect all of us. So again, all of this comes down to the fact that you're protected more by widespread deployment of security technologies than you are by allowing the police to break into security technologies.
Indeed, Stephen. I couldn't have said it better myself. Well, we're closing out 2024. We just have a few weeks left in the year, and we know that everybody's getting ready to do their big holiday and things like that. But that doesn't mean that you can't start planning for 2025. And you really should, because we have. We've actually gotten the first half of our calendar year up on techfieldday.com, and we have some exciting stuff coming up that you're definitely going to want to take advantage of. And the first thing is happening courtesy of Stephen. So, Stephen, what have you got on deck?
We are returning with more AI Field Day the last week in January, and then our good friend Alistair Cook is going to be leading Cloud Field Day in the third week in February. And then is it right around there as well that you're heading off to Europe?
It's actually going to be the week before that. We are planning on heading over to Amsterdam for Cisco Live EMEA once again this year. We are excited to be taking part in some of the next big announcements from Cisco and some of the cool stuff that they have to kick off the year. And of course, we're going to be eating those teeny tiny pancakes that are so amazing. And I'm going to skip the French fries and mayonnaise because that's just weird. But we will be back in March 19th and the 20th for the next edition of Networking Field Day. It's one of our longest running events. We have such an amazing crowd of delegates and people who are interested watching live online. Remember that you can always find the latest schedule, a lineup of presenting companies, as well as the delegates that will be attending by heading over to techfieldday.com. We want to thank you all for watching the Gestalt IT Rundown. Remember that you can catch a new episode every Wednesday here on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Gestalt IT video. You can read the show notes on gestaltit.com. You can subscribe to us. Just fire up a podcast application like Apple Podcast or Overcast or whatever you use and search for the Gestalt IT Rundown. And we'll have the audio version of the episode out. You listen to it in your car when you're driving to that office Christmas party that you're dreading. But if you also want to check out some of the stories that we reference and some of the people that we work with, make sure you head over to techstrong.tv. You can also check out futurumgroup.com because a lot of the coworkers that we have over at Futurum Group and TechStrong are regular contributors, both in read-in stories, but also co-hosts and things like that. Don't forget that we'll be back next week to talk about more of the stuff that's been going on. We'll be recording a year-end wrap-up episode very soon where we hit some of the biggest points of the things that have gone on through the year. You'll probably hear some greatest hits of the stories that we've covered so far, maybe some of the misses that we think some folks need to take a closer look at as well. And we will be continuing to bring you great episodes both then and into 2025. So for my Limber co-host, Mr. Stephen Foskett, thank you very much for tuning in this week, and we hope that you have an amazing holiday season, and we'll see you for the wrap-up episode next week.